Looks like the liberal media isn't really all that liberal. As reported on by numerous outlets over the past few weeks, Lesley Stahl, a reporter for CBS News Magazine's 60 Minutes show, is a major supporter, or was, apparently, of the Peterson Foundation. Until recently, she was actually listed on the foundation's website as a member of its advisory board. Named for its founder, a billionaire former private equity manager, the Peterson Foundation is one of the most prominent groups involved in the push for so-called entitlement reform, also known as let's privatize Social Security, hand it off to Wall Street, make money off it. In March, Pete Peterson himself even met with President Obama to discuss budget-related issues. As Richard Eskow wrote in a recent piece about Stahl's relationship to Peterson for the Huffington Post, the most important editorial decision may not be how to cover a story, but which stories will be covered at all. But if the journalists who are supposed to be telling us the facts have an agenda, how do we know if we're watching news, not propaganda? For more on this, I'm joined now by Richard Eskow, Senior Fellow at the Campaign for America's Future. Richard, welcome back.
Good to be here again, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. First of all, it seems like Stahl's involvement with the Peterson Foundation is a pretty, big ethical flag. Why would CBS allow this? And frankly, why would she do something that is this conspicuously anti-journalistic, indicating some sort of a bias?
Well, I think the answer to that is partially that one of the brilliant propaganda moves, the Pete Peterson anti-Social Security, anti-Medicare, anti-government, anti-taxing the rich, anti-taxing corporations clique has done is made all of these far-right positions out to be somehow nonpartisan or bipartisan or centrist when they're really none of these things. So I think she felt, as opposed to, say, belonging to, the Socialist Workers' Party, that somehow she could characterize this, and it would probably be characterized by many of her friends and peers, as an unbiased and bipartisan effort for her to be involved in. So I think she probably thought she could get away with it, whereas if she was on the board of a group seeking to expand Social Security, which is a position most Republicans, as well as most Americans, want to see supported, she would probably... most Americans of all kinds, yeah. Democrats, Republicans, across the board, she would probably have to say, well, that's too far left for me to associate myself. So this is the kind of bias we're seeing, among the very powerful and influential.
Yeah. In your article discussing Stahl's relationship to the Peterson Foundation, you point out the following segment on police tactics from a May 5th broadcast of 60 Minutes as evidence of Stahl's reporting bias. Check this out.
Let me ask you something. Those functions that you are performing, that sounds to me like a social service job instead of a police job.
If the government is not going to do it, or individuals are not going to do it, why can't the police provide leadership and partner up with the community and say, hey, here's a plan. This is what we want to do to help? Because
to what degree did her, what's your response to that?
Well, two things. One is that was in a segment called Counterinsurgency Cops that was glorifying the militarization of the American police force. So two things. One is, these so-called anti-deficit groups like Pete Peterson, so the one she was on the board of, they're not really anti-deficit because they're big supporters of defense contracting and defense spending. And the group Fix the Debt, which is also supported by Pete Peterson, is dominated by defense contractors who are stand to make billions off this counterinsurgency cop movement. So I think she had a dual conflict of interest there, because she's there kind of saying, hey, government's not doing it, so why don't we spend billions militarizing our police force so that they can try to help ghetto kids find jobs while they're kicking down doors and militarizing the inner cities of America. So I really think it's a black and white play out of the Peterson agenda in a pretty shocking form.
Has CBS responded to your article? To these
no,
concerns?
They haven't, and I wrote a second piece covering the other two stories in last Sunday night's episode, including Scott Pelley's piece, and another piece on injured veterans, both of which took the same government's not going to do it tone, rather than the old 60 Minutes, which says, why isn't government doing it? The old journalistic stance. Now it seems to be, let's beg billionaires and depend on the kindness of strangers, and never once mention the low tax rate that billionaires and corporations pay. So it's really shocking, and it's really disturbing, and I've heard nothing from them.